This is Jim Johnston. For 32 years, he was the man behind many of the most iconic theme songs in WWE. On screen now are just some of the wrestlers for whom Johnston wrote the music for. I wanted to look into how music complements the action in the ring, and then take a closer look at some of the greatest themes in WWE history. So I interviewed Jim about how he created these themes, his musical influence and process, and all things music. But first, let's look at the role that music plays generally in wrestling. I'm hoping that I can make this video accessible for people who are coming at this from either a musical angle or a wrestling one, so excuse me if I may explain some things about either one that may seem basic to those of you who know already. The loudest crowd reactions in WWE don't usually come at the action in the ring, they come instead at the music. Music and professional wrestling have a long and rich history, and music takes many forms within the business. The primary form that music takes is in the form of theme music for the wrestlers. As the wrestlers make their way to the ring, each wrestler or group of wrestlers has a unique theme song that plays for them. Occasionally, these are simply songs that already exist. Bands like Alter Bridge and Living Colour have been used for this purpose, but by and large, this music is specifically written for the wrestlers. This is where we come back to Jim Johnston, who was the first dedicated theme music composer. Some wrestlers, for example the legendary Gorgeous George, had always had entrance music, but largely wrestlers entered only to the cheers or boos of the crowd. This is until the mid-1980s, when Jim Johnston began working for Vince McMahon, the then chairman of WWE, and began to write music for all the wrestlers for the first time. First, we'll look at one of the most iconic and foreboding pieces of entrance music of all time, that of The Undertaker. To understand the music of The Undertaker, we first need to understand who The Undertaker is, because first and foremost, The Undertaker isn't a man, he's a character. Without getting into complex debates about whether wrestling is a sport or how legitimate it is, for our interests, I'll just sum it up as this. Wrestling is scripted. It's fake fighting, but with real stunts. And obviously, The Undertaker isn't an actual Undertaker. He's a professional wrestler, acting as an Undertaker. His character is a macabre, funeral and gothic-themed supernatural wrestler, known by nicknames such as the Phenom and the Deadman. Various iconography has been associated with the character over the years. For example, his costume of a long, black leather coat, and an especially iconic wide-brimmed hat. Props of monks, urns and coffins have all been used to enhance this morbid imagery. The character has been one of the most protected in all of wrestling history, winning a record-setting 21 matches in a row at WrestleMania, WWE's flagship event held every year, known as The Streak. And it wasn't until the eve of his retirement that glimpses of the man behind the hat began to seep through. Behind the mystique is a man called Mark Calloway, and when I talked to Johnston, he had this to say about how Mark is behind the scenes and how it impacted the eventual music he would create for the character.
You know, Mark, who's the Undertaker, being with him in a room, he's pretty much that same guy. It isn't like he's backstage, jumping all around, and he's just a huge, low-key, mellow, doesn't say a lot. That's his clock.
The Undertaker himself has spoken about the role of his music, saying that most people don't realise that the entrance is part of the match. It really is. It sets the whole table for what you're about to do in the ring, and what's going to happen from that point forward. When that bong went off, that was go time. That bong that The Undertaker describes in his music is a number of layered bells combined with a low, open E of a bass guitar, heard at a painfully slow tempo, matching The Undertaker's slow, menacing, considered walk towards the ring. But how did the music begin? Johnston initially wrote the melody as a softer piano piece, which he played for me here.
And written almost as a nursery rhyme.
He then expanded on this piano piece to become more epic and symphonic. The piece opens with a choir, initially quiet and considered, whilst an organ and various ominous sound effects of rain and thunder slowly enter. The extended introduction assists the entrance itself, with the smoke allowed to billow as the organ crescendos, meaning the powerful climax comes at the right point. As probably the most protected character in the history of wrestling, this allows the mystery to build before the climax of the entrance. Speaking of this climax, it's an expanded version of Chopin's Piano Sonata No. 2 in B-flat minor, taking its harmonic and rhythmic basis from this funeral march. The piece is fairly simple, something Johnston has himself noted.
Most of the great melodies are really, really simple, but there's nothing more difficult to do than simple. So much of the time, the first things our minds come up with is a little too complicated, and it's about sort of paring all the crap out of the way until you get down to the essence of it.
This speaks to perhaps Johnston's greatest strength as a composer, a real focus and emphasis on melody above all. When I asked Johnston about how much the strength of melody stuck out in his work, this was what he had to say.
First and foremost, thank you for noticing that, because I think that melody is a necessary part of successful music. Otherwise, it's just sort of a track, because the way I see it, the track is there to support the melody. That said, the melody came at all different times. Sometimes it's the thing that starts the process off, and sometimes it's an interesting chord progression that just catches my ear, and the melody follows. The melody develops. A lot of times I'm playing some chords and I have one melody, but kind of that's okay, but it could be better. Melody is such a powerful thing. Is you can have a not so good melody in your mind and know that this needs to be better than this. It's hard to get that first bad melody out of your head. There's something with the human condition that melody resonates. I think it's crucially important, and I think it's desperately missing from modern music. I challenge anyone to go through their favorite songs, and I will bet part of the reason that's their favorite is there's a melody there, because it's something that resonates emotionally and something that they can remember.
It's harmonically fairly basic too, with the most simple, fundamental, and powerful harmonic relationship in Western harmony being used heavily here, the perfect cadence, here in E minor. The authority and power that this cadence speaks with reflects the power that the Undertaker has in the ring. Throughout, the piece remains in E minor, except for one period where it shifts to the modal dominant key of B minor, injecting a new life into an otherwise very slow piece. The instrumentation is a mix of orchestral, church, and rock instrumentation, with the church bells, organ, and choir combining with the strings and brass of the orchestra, and the bass guitar and distorted guitar of modern rock music. Johnston himself, who told me how pleased and proud he was that the music has stuck with so many people across the years, describes an extended symphonic version of the theme that he has, since by their nature wrestling themes are quite short, so he's had no opportunity to make it in full. So maybe we'll hear a symphonic version of The Undertaker's music one day. Perhaps the best way to sum up the music of The Undertaker is in the words of the dead man himself, who once said that music was just doom and gloom. You knew what was coming. The Undertaker's theme is a great example of a theme that Johnston worked on from start to finish, both writing and recording it. However, sometimes themes that Johnston has written are handed over to established artists to record. So what makes a theme that Johnston takes to completion himself versus one that he hands over to another artist to record the music he's written?
That's an interesting question. I guess a lot of times it was coincidental opportunity that a lot of the labels had recognized things we had done with other bands and seen that WWE was, particularly for rock-oriented bands, was a great promotional vehicle because to expose themselves to our audience was really advantageous for us, and a lot of times a lot more effective than going down more traditional outlets. A lot of times whatever I'd be working on, it would just be a good fit where I would say like, oh, well, I just spoke with the head of this label who would love to get this band involved. This would be a perfect thing for them, and let them do it.
Perhaps the best example of a theme that's been given to another artist are the various themes recorded for Triple H by Motorhead, most notably his song The Game. Firstly, I'll briefly explain who Triple H is. Working mostly as a heel, Triple H is one of the most legendary wrestlers of all time, working his way up to now being the head of creative at WWE. He's been referred to by nicknames such as the Cerebral Assassin, The Game, and the King of Kings, and has had more themes than any other wrestler written for him by Johnston.
I wrote 3 different songs for them, I think. I have never even fully counted how many different things I wrote for Triple H. And then there were multiple versions. Pays to marry the boss's daughter.
Getting Motorhead involved, as an already legendary band by the time they recorded The Game, was different to other bands, for WWE asked Motorhead, as Triple H's favourite band, to record the song. Originally, the versions recorded by WWE themselves didn't have the power that Triple H was looking for. But Motorhead's version certainly did. The song itself is a fairly basic, straight-ahead rock song. It's in the guitar-friendly key of E minor, and lyrically it paints Triple H not as a student or master of the game, but the game itself. The intro of the song features the band simultaneously sounding an E5 power chord as Lemmy's growled vocals begin.
It's time to play the game.
Before the alternating 2 quavers and crotchet pattern that dominates the rest of the song.
It's all about the game, and how you play it. All about control, and if you can take it.
Calling it one of the most badass themes in the history of the WWE, Triple H has spoken extensively about the relationship that developed between him and Motorhead's late frontman Lemmy as a result of the song. Speaking at Lemmy's funeral, Triple H expanded on the use of music within WWE.
Music creates the image. Music creates the emotion and the feel for what you do. It can create a character and it can mean success. And it was this amazing partnership. And trust me, if you're not a fan of what we do, if you're in a stadium with about 80,000 people in it, and you're coming up on a riser onto a stage with smoke all around you, with the world title around your waist, and you look to your side as you come up with lasers and pyro and Motorhead playing, and fucking Lemmy is standing next to you singing about you, it is the most kick-ass thing of all time.
Writing music for wrestling involves writing in a huge number of styles, and writing a huge quantity of music. One example comes with the Great Khali, who is basically a very tall Indian wrestler. Writing Indian music wasn't something that Johnston had ever done before.
I mean, I recognized Indian music, but I didn't really know anything about it. I did a lot of research about it, and both lyrically, I mean, he was from this area that translates in English to Land of Five Rivers, which is what I ended up titling the song. I just found that inspiring because I actually, my family's from a part of Arkansas in the US, which has a bunch of rivers that congregate right in that area, and how that affects life in that area. Just the different scales that they use. And so it was great. It ended up being challenging yet fun, and you learn about this whole different way of putting music together and what the priorities are in that part of the world.
As well as writing a huge variety of music, writing for WWE involves a huge quantity of music. WWE doesn't have a season, it runs all year round, and they're always needing new music, whether it's for a wrestler, a show, or something else.
WWE culture moves at such a extraordinary and oftentimes extraordinarily disorganized pace. Someone new is here, and it's like nobody knows anything about him, and it's like, well, boom, he's coming out tonight, so he needs a theme and, costuming, storylines. So a lot of times the first theme I come out with is what I had 4 hours to come up with, so you take your best shot.
One key feature of a wrestler's theme is that it needs to be immediately recognizable. The Undertaker's Gone and Lemmy's iconic voice provide this instant recognizability in those songs, but the most iconic opening to a wrestler's theme music is this. The glass shattering, combined with the noise of a car wreck that opens the music of Stone Cold Steve Austin. In an interview with Sports Illustrated, Johnston said that he started this music for a no bullshit ass kicker type anti-hero on the guitar. Sports Illustrated also says in this article that Telecasters don't play hard rock music though, so someone should probably tell Jimmy Page at some point. Stone Cold's music is another example of the music reflecting the character perfectly. The song is written in E Phrygian, the darkest mode of the major scale that actually has widespread practical use. The characteristic note of the mode is this flat second, the F natural in this case, which is used heavily throughout the main riff of the song, alternating with bluesy bends, mostly up to the fifth of B. The second section sees a little more chromaticism with the F-sharp 5 chord. The next section can be considered in a couple of ways, depending on how you hear it. The tonal centre definitely remains in E, but you can think of these B flats or A sharps as the flat fifth associated with the blues scale, or see the piece as shifting mode, and the B flats or A sharps being the sharp 4 associated with the Lydian scale. The presence of the flat 2s in the Fs signal that it's a blue note rather than a shift in mode, but to my ears, I hear it as a very Lydian sound, akin to something like the Simpsons theme. The Simpsons. That's everything I wanted to say about music in WWE and Jim Johnston's role in creating most of the iconic wrestling music throughout history. And I want to say a huge thanks to Jim Johnston for letting me interview him and being so helpful in making this video. And please go check him out and listen to all his music.